Tata, Mahindra, Maruti, Hindustan, Premium. For many people outside India, those names don't carry the same instant recognition as Ferrari, Mercedes Benz, or Jaguar, which makes what happened next all the more remarkable. For most of automotive history, India wasn't leading the conversation. It was learning, building under license, adapting foreign designs, trying to provide mobility for a nation that had only recently become independent. If you had looked at India's automotive industry in the 1950s, you probably wouldn't have predicted that one day an Indian company would own Jaguar or Land Rover. You probably wouldn't have predicted that India would become one of the world's largest automobile markets, or that vehicles designed for Indian roads will eventually find customers on nearly every continent. So, how did a country that entered the automotive race relatively late become one of its most important players? To answer that, we have to go back to a nation that wasn't asking how to build the fastest car or the most luxurious one. It was trying to answer a far more fundamental question: how do you put an entire country on wheels? Because India's automotive story wasn't simply about building cars, it was about building mobility for hundreds of millions of people. India's first generation of automobiles didn't begin with clean sheets of paper. They began with familiar faces: the Hindustan Ambassador, the Premier Padmini, the Standard Herald. To modern eyes, they can seem almost frozen in time. Cars that continued to be built long after the rest of the world had moved on. But that's only true if you're looking at them through the wrong lens. These weren't failed attempts to build modern cars. They were successful attempts to build an automotive industry. Take the Hindustan Ambassador, based on the Morris Oxford Series 3 from Britain. It wasn't the newest design on the road. It wasn't supposed to be. Its job wasn't to win beauty contests or set lap records. Its job was something far more ambitious: to keep moving across crowded cities, across dusty roads, through monsoon rains. For decades, it became the family car, the government car, the taxi, the diplomatic car, the wedding car. At one point, it almost stopped being a car and simply became the car. The Premier Padmini told a similar story. Derived from the Fiat 1100, it found its own identity on Indian streets, weaving through traffic that would make a driving instructor quietly reconsider their career choices. Both cars became woven into everyday life, not because they represented the cutting edge of automotive technology, but because they were representing something arguably more important: continuity, reliability, familiarity. There's an easy mistake to make when looking back at old cars: to assume that if a design remained in production for decades, it must have been because nobody could build anything better. Sometimes, the reason is much simpler. When a country is still building its industrial foundations, proven engineering is often more valuable than constant reinvention. For India, these cars weren't the destination, they were the classroom. The country wasn't just manufacturing automobiles, it was learning how to manufacture at scale. And once you've learned that lesson, something interesting begins to happen. Eventually, you stop building other people's idea and start building your own. By the early 1980s, India's automotive industry faced a new challenge. The cars that had helped build the industry were no longer enough to transform it. The ambassador was dependable, the Premier Padmini was familiar, but a new generation wanted something different, something smaller, more efficient, more modern. India didn't just need more cars, it needed more people to own them. That shift arrived in an unassuming little hatchback, the Maruti 800. At first glance, there was nothing particularly intimidating about it. No enormous engine, no extravagant styling, no racing pedigree. It wasn't trying to dominate the road, it was trying to democratize it. Built through a partnership with Suzuki, the Maruti 800 introduced millions of Indian families to car ownership. For many households, it wasn't just the first new car, it was the first car. Entire generations learned to drive in one. Family holidays began in one. School runs, wedding trips, weekend markets. For countless people, Memories arrived in a Maruti before they arrived anywhere else. And that's easy to underestimate. History often celebrates the fastest cars, the most expensive, the rarest. But if the purpose of an automobile is mobility, few vehicles have changed as many lives as the ones ordinary people could actually afford. The Maruti 800 didn't redefine performance, it redefined possibility. It showed that a modern, efficient car could become part of everyday life rather than an extraordinary purchase. More importantly, it changed expectations. Indian consumers had seen what modern manufacturing could produce. There will be no going back. Because once a country raises its expectations, its industries have to rise with them. By the 1990s, India's automotive industry was no longer an apprentice, it had graduated. The country had spent decades assembling cars, training engineers, building supplier networks, learning manufacturing, developing an industrial ecosystem. Now, the economy itself was changing. As India opened its markets, competition arrived with unprecedented force. Suddenly, manufacturers weren't just competing with a company across town, they were competing with the world. For some industries, that kind of competition is terrifying. For India's car makers, it became an education. Global companies brought new technologies, new production methods, new expectations. Indian manufacturers had two choices: watch from the sidelines or learn faster than ever before. Companies like Tata Motors and Mahindra chose the second option. They weren't content with simply assembling vehicles designed somewhere else. They wanted to solve Indian problems with Indian engineering. That meant vehicles capable of handling crowded cities, rough rural roads, long distances, and customers who expected every rupee to work as hard as they did. Designing for India was never simple. It's a country where one road can take you from modern expressways to mountain passes to villages where the GPS quietly gives up and wishes you the best of luck. If vehicles could earn the trust of Indian drivers, there was a good chance it could earn the trust of drivers almost anywhere. Without much fanfare, India had become something more than a growing car market. It had become an engineering laboratory. And before long, the rest of the world began to notice. For decades, India had learned from the rest of the automotive world. Now, it wanted to prove something, that it could build a car of its own. In 1998, Tata introduced the Indica. It wasn't simply another hatchback, it represented something much larger. An India company designing a modern passenger car primarily for Indian drivers. The goal wasn't to imitate Europe or Japan or America. It was to answer a familiar question in a new way. What does a good car look like when it's designed around Indian realities from the very beginning? The Indica wasn't perfect. Few first attempts ever are. But perfection was never the point. Progress was. Every generation of engineers inherits the work of the last. The ambassador taught India how to manufacture. The Maruti 800 helped modernize expectations. The Indica asked something different. What can we create ourselves? That question didn't stop with one car. It spread across the industry. Indian manufacturers expanded their engineering capabilities, invested in research, developed new platforms, looked beyond their own borders. And then, something happened that would have seemed almost impossible just a few decades earlier. In 2008, Tata Motors acquired Jaguar and Land Rover. Think about that for a moment. A country that had once built licensed versions of British cars was now responsible for two of Britain's most iconic automotive brands. History has a wonderful sense of irony. The student hadn't replaced the teacher. The student had become a fellow engineer. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part of India's automotive story. Not that it caught up, but that it reached a point where the conversation had become one between equals. Today, India builds millions of vehicles every year: passenger cars, motorcycles, buses, trucks. Sorry, Britain will call those lorries. We'll let them have that one. Its factories export vehicles across the globe. Its engineers develop platforms sold on multiple continents. its automobile industry has become one of the largest on earth. That's an extraordinary transformation. Not because India became another Britain or another Japan or another America. It didn't. It became India. The country's automotive journey followed its own road, one shaped by an enormous population, rapid urbanization, economic change, and the challenge of making mobility accessible on a scale few nations have ever attempted. Looking back, it's easy to focus on the companies, the acquisitions, the production numbers, but those are really just milestones. The deeper story is written in the cars themselves. The ambassador reminds us that every industry begins by learning. The Maruti 800 shows what happens when mobility becomes attainable. The Indica represents the confidence to create rather than imitate. And today's Indian vehicles demonstrate something every successful automotive nation eventually discovers. Great cars don't emerge in isolation. They emerge from societies that spend decades solving thousands of small engineering problems. Factories improve, suppliers improve, roads improve, engineers improve. One generation teaches the next, until one day, the country that once looked outward for inspiration has quietly become a source of inspiration itself. Because the story of India's automobile was never simply about catching up, it was about finding its own direction. And in doing so, it proved something that every great automotive nation eventually learns. The destination matters, but it's the journey that builds the industry.